Morning everyone, thanks for joining us for today's GCSE English session. Today is the second part of our sessions on paper 1 question 4 for your English language GCSE. Lots of you have joined us for question 4 part 1 and also for our previous sessions on other questions. So welcome back, excuse me. Today's session, as usual, will run for an hour, so we'll finish at 12. And if you have any questions at all during the session, just drop those in the chat or Q&A. I'm Tilly, I work at my tutor, and our tutor today is Vicki, who lots of you know already. So if you have any questions for either of us, just drop those in the chat. As lots of you know, Vicki's a trained English teacher with tons of experience tutoring and has done over 250 lessons with us, which is really fantastic. Hi, welcome back. So as usual, you'll be able to access the recording of this lesson on YouTube. I will just mention, as a couple of people have flagged this morning in our chemistry session, there are a couple of tutorials missing from this week, and that's just because there was an issue uploading them, but they will be uploaded at the start of next week when that issue is resolved. So don't worry if you were trying to access something that wasn't there, and yeah, sorry about that. So I'll just wait a couple of moments as some other people join us. Let's have a look. Okay, fantastic. And yeah, just a reminder that this is an English language session. And if you guys are joining us for any other sessions today, what we have this afternoon is a double bill of maths. So that's at 2 and 3:15 to make up for the missed session on Monday that didn't go ahead. Let's have a look. And also just a reminder for those of you that sometimes ask about other English resources, if you do go on the My Tutor YouTube channel and the English playlist, Vicki's recorded a ton of really handy shorter videos, so sort of around 5 minutes long, where she's analysing a piece of text according to exam questions. So that should be really handy for you guys. Cool, Vicki, you all ready to get started?
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant, have a good session.
Fab. Right, good morning everyone. So how many have you got this morning? Nice to see you all back. So we're going to be returning to paper 1 question 4, as Tilly has mentioned this morning. So we're only doing 2 parts on question 4 just because last week we had that missed session for the question 3, so that rolled over to our Tuesday session. So we've only got 2 questions on, not 2 sessions on question 4. So this will be the last session today on question 4. So if you do have any burning, pressing questions or concerns, worries, things that you'd like cleared up, this will be your last chance for me to really go into depth with question 4. Of course, if you do think of something later on, sort of next week, something pops into your mind over the weekend, I will answer them. But I'm likely not to be able to answer them as effectively because I won't have the resources in front of me to help demonstrate what I'm talking about. So just bear that in mind, really. Right, so first of all, what terminology can you remember from paper 1, questions 2 and 3? So that is language devices and features and structural devices and features. I'll give you a couple of minutes to send me some ideas over, please. Oh, thank you. I'm really glad that that Dracula one helped you out. That's lovely to hear. Thank you for sending that over. Pathetic fallacy, yeah. Juxtaposition, oxymoron, absolutely. Hyperbole as well. Just be careful how you were spelling those. So juxtaposition is spelled like this. And hyperbole is spelled like that. Fantastic. Any others? Sentence lengths, yeah. So that's simple, compound, complex, and minor. Zooming in and out, tone of voice, lovely. Oh, thank you. That's so much. Ria, thank you. Flashback. It's so lovely that you guys are actually sending through feedback on those videos, which I wasn't expecting you to. So thank you very much for that. Always appreciate feedback in any form. Cyclical, yep, absolutely. So sibilance, lovely. So in terms of, so I've given you sort of two ways to learn language devices and structural devices. So personification, pathetic fallacy, so this is the proud smile. Repetition, rhetorical question. Oxymoron, use of senses, detailed description, simile, symbolism, and sounds. Underneath the sounds bracket comes alliteration, sibilance, and onomatopoeia. Metaphors, imagery, length of sentences, and the user edit, which we don't need for the question 2. There's obviously other ones in there, so juxtaposition and hyperbole. There will be some more in there as well. Question 3, so that was my little stop Fez one, which is a little bit rubbish. So start, setting, transition, omniscient narrator, perspective, so that could be free and direct, that could be first person, it could be third person, it could be over the shoulder. We've also got flashback, flash forward, focus, ending, zoom in and out, repetition, cyclical structure. I think of any others off the top of my head. So that's most of them anyway. So yeah, nice little refresher, just because it's really important to keep those in mind. So what can you talk about or speak about in question 4, and what does a question 4 look like? So what can you remember that we talked about from yesterday's session? Oh yeah, characterization, Millie. Yeah, that's a really nice one. Forgot that one. Cracking. Yeah, it's much longer. Absolutely. So your questions 2 and 3 have been 8 markers. So we're looking at 2 or 3 paragraphs for those ones. Your question 1 is a 4 marker, and you only have to write 4 sentences for that one. That should be a nice, quick, straightforward, easy one to get you rolling in the exam. Remember with your question 1 that you need to be writing in full sentences, not just pulling out direct quotations. They need to be in full sentences, otherwise you don't get the mark. Yep, so you're absolutely right. Question 4 is a lot longer. So the sort of bare minimum really that we should be aiming for is 4 paragraphs. And those should be chunky paragraphs as well, not on the small side. Yeah, good. So it's a 20 marker. It's an evaluative question. Yeah, so we're looking at a different assessment objective. So we're talking about why something is effective, how it's effective, whereas really we're just talking on a more basic level. We're talking at words and phrases level. For language devices and features. Structure is also of a similar ilk because it's looking at the same assessment objective. That's assessment objective 2. This one is looking at assessment objective 4. Yeah, so you're asked to what extent do you agree? Absolutely, yeah. So Lucy, it is agree and disagree. So you can agree, you can disagree, you can slightly agree, slightly disagree, you can sit on the fence. It doesn't matter, there isn't a preference. I've definitely taught some students in the past who have thought it's more intelligent and cleverer to disagree because it's harder to find the evidence, and they've sort of got this misconception that because it's harder to write about, you get more marks because it's more challenging. Which it isn't. Any opinion carries the same weight of marks. You don't get extra marks because it's more difficult. So what some teachers suggest is that you just agree because it's easier to, generally. These statements that you are given are usually easier and are usually set up to agree. I'm going to go through a little bit of sort of how we can work out whether we agree or disagree. My general advice is agree to some extent, just because there's usually more evidence. If you are thinking, oh, I want to disagree, my advice to you would be that is fine. Just make sure that you've got enough mileage in what you can write about, because there's nothing worse than writing that you disagree about something. You get to the end of the second paragraph and you think, oh my goodness, I haven't got anything else to write. So even if you do disagree, it really doesn't matter for the exam the examiner and the exam board, as long as you write a good, effective response. So if you think, oh, well, I do disagree with this, however, there's loads more evidence for agreeing, I would say agree. It doesn't really matter. You know, you're not going to be sort of held at gunpoint and say, are you sure that you agree or disagree? So in the long scheme of things, it doesn't really matter which you choose, as long as you've got enough evidence. That's the important thing. Have you got enough evidence and enough to say for this longer essay question? Yeah, Millie transitions as well for structural features. Right, so context then. So today I've gone for something slightly different. So since we've been looking at texts, I've pretty much chosen texts that are from what we call the literary canon. So these are texts that are very famous, well-renowned, sort of loved by critics. I've mainly gone for 20th century canon, just because you're more likely to get 20th or 21st century. I don't think you'll get any 19th century on your paper one, but I have included some of those just because I think it's nice to have a great breadth of ideas, and it improves your knowledge. The thing to say about this is you won't get literary canon texts. In the exam, you will get usually obscure short stories. So today I've chosen an obscure short story. So this extract is taken from the middle of a short story called The Paper Menagerie by Ken Liu. Published in 2012, the short story follows the narrator, a young child, reflecting on the origami animals his mother made for him when he was little. It's quite a sweet little story. So you haven't got the whole text here. You won't have the entirety of a short story, because even though it is a short stories do tend to be several pages long, not just 1.5 pages. So you will always get an extract. So let's have a look at the question. So you will get focus this part on your answer from, you will get in the exam line and whatever number it is to the end. So for this one, I've said paragraph 2 to the end, just because it was slightly easier for me to format. So you will always get a statement. It's either a reader said or a student said, but it will be somebody who is of your age and something that someone of your age is likely to say. So it won't be ridiculously complex and something that you might expect to see in a university dissertation or anything like that. It'll be completely approachable for you. So a reader said, this part of the story where the narrator watches his mother make him a paper menagerie shows that. So you will always get this part of the story, and then you will get sort of a very brief summary of what is going on in that part of the story, and then shows that, and then you will get sort of 2 statements. So he has an active imagination and is spellbound by her creations. So what we need to be doing is we need to be thinking about those statements as we go along. So bare minimum, we need to be writing sort of 2 paragraphs for each. Now you get to what extent do you agree? In your response, you could include, you could consider impressions of the narrator, evaluate how the writer creates a sense of childhood, and support your responses with references to the text, which has fallen off the bottom there, unfortunately. So with the bullet points that you're given here, they are very different in terms of what you get for question 2 and question 3 and the bullet points you're given. Can anyone tell me why they are different, how they are different? So with our questions 2 and 3, yeah, so our questions 2 and 3 are quite specific, aren't they? So language devices and features, words and phrases, and sentence forms. That's our question 2 bullet points. So those are telling us what to look for, sort of telling us what features we could look at. Question 3, the bullet points are what the writer focuses your attention on at the beginning, how and why the writer changes your focus throughout the extract, and any other structural features that may interest you. So again, they're telling you what to look for. Now with these, they are telling you what to look for in a sense, but they're more talking about these are the things that you should be thinking about when you actually write your response. So it's almost effectively like a P paragraph. So you've got your point, which is consider your own impressions of the narrator, your evidence, which is support your response with references to the text, and then your evaluation, your analysis, evaluate how the writer creates a sense of childhood. So with these, that's effectively how we should be structuring our answers, but our paragraphs should be looking at these two phrases in red here. So this is what we need to be doing then. So I'm going to colour code for and against for each of the following. So the narrator has an active imagination, and the narrator is spellbound by his mother's creations. So what I'll do as usual is I will read through the extract. Once we'll have a little bit of chat about in terms of what we think, what our impressions are of the text, and then we will start thinking about for or against, using those pieces of information. So at my request, Mom also made me a goat, a deer and a water buffalo out of wrapping paper. They would run around the living room while Leo chased after them, growling. When he caught them, he would press down until the air went out of them and they became just flat, folded up pieces of paper. I would then have to blow into them to reinflate them so they could run around some more. Sometimes the animals got into trouble. Once the water buffalo jumped into a dish of soy sauce on the dinner table. He wanted to wallow like a real water buffalo. I picked him up out quickly, but the capillary action had already pulled the dark liquid high up into his legs. The sauce softened legs would not hold him up, and he collapsed onto the table. I dried him out in the sun, but his legs became crooked after that, and he ran around with a limp. Mom eventually wrapped his leg in a saran wrap so that he would wallow to his heart's content, just not in soy sauce. Also, Leo liked to pounce at sparrows when he and I played in the backyard, but one time a cornered bird struck back in desperation and tore his ear. He whimpered and winced as I held him, and Mom patched his ear together with tape. He avoided birds after that. And then one day I saw a TV documentary about sharks and asked Mum for one of my own. She made the shark, but he flapped about on the table unhappily. I filled the sink with water and put him in. He swam around and around happily. However, after a while he became soggy and translucent and slowly sank to the bottom, the folds coming undone. I reached in to rescue him, and all I ended up with was a wet piece of paper. Leo put his front paws together at the end of the sink and rested his head on them, ears drooping. He made a low growl in his throat that made me feel guilty. Mum made a new shark for me this time out of tinfoil. The shark lived happily in a large goldfish bowl. Leo and I liked to sit next to the bowl and watch the tinfoil shark chasing the goldfish. Leo sticking his face up against the bowl on the other side so that I saw his eyes, magnified to the size of coffee cups, staring at me from across the bowl. Right, so we are focusing on paragraph 2 to the end. So always good to draw a line just so you don't end up talking about things that you won't get credit for. Right, so what do we think? What are our impressions then of the narrator? What's the sense of childhood wonder that is going on? How do we feel? Yeah, lovely. There's a lot of personification in here. Also anthropomorphism. Yeah, lovely. Anything else? Yeah, he's an incredibly imaginative child, isn't he? I imagine that this is an only child because I'm an only child, and this seems very much like something I would do because my toys would keep me company. Yeah, he does seem mesmerised, doesn't he? He has this entire collection, this entire family of origami animals, and they seem to be the centre of his life, at least at this point, don't they? Yeah, lovely. What are our feelings towards the narrator? What is the tone of this text? Yeah, I don't think it's a case of I mean, he might not have many friends. That's a valid argument that we could make. The other thing that I think he's an only child, personally. Yeah, the tone is definitely quite childlike, quite imaginative, isn't it? He makes an entire life out of these paper animals. Can someone tell me what a menagerie is, please? Because I imagine someone out there might not know what that is, although you might have been able to work it out. Right, so I will tell you. So a menagerie is a sort of another word for a zoo, really. Menageries might be slightly smaller, so I suppose a hyperbolic phrase. My partner's family have a huge amount of animals. They've got about 20 horses, about the same amount of cats. They've got a couple of pigs, a couple of dogs, a couple of rabbits, a few geese. It's mental. There are loads of. They've got about 60 animals. So we refer to it as a menagerie because there just are. There's so many of them, and it's not sort of at a domestic level. So I suppose a normal house might maybe have 2 or 3 pets. So for example, I have 3, which is sort of quite a normal level, I think. Whereas they have quite an excessive amount, which is much more than the everyday person. Right, so let's have a go through then. So first of all, let's have a look at this child having an active imagination. So I'm just going to get my highlighting tool out. Right, so sometimes the animals got into trouble. So we know that they're not real animals, don't we? So they can't actually get into trouble. It's just sort of a game that he's playing in his head. Once the water buffalo jumped into a dish of soy sauce on the table at dinner. So again, we know that this literally can't happen. So this is an example of personification. So we've got lots and lots of personification going on in here. So I'm not going to write personification every time I see it, just because there is so much. Did you want me to type personification? Is that what you're asking? Oh, lovely. Yeah, so we could also refer to him as the protagonist. So he's the main character. He's a relatively good character. The opposite to protagonist is antagonist. So sort of the enemy, effectively. So, for example, Dracula is an antagonist because, you know, he's a vampire and he's quite happy to sort of have people killed because of his nature. And the protagonist is a man called Jonathan Harker who tries to end Dracula, basically. Yeah. So I think what I might do is let's stick with the highlighter. Right, so he wanted to water like a real water buffalo. So we've got a simile going on there. So he is aware that They aren't real. He's aware that they are imaginative, so it's not like sort of a weird hallucination or something like that. Fabulous. Right. I picked him out quickly, but the capillary reaction had already poured the dark liquid high up into his legs. The sauce softened legs, so we could have that as alliteration, but it's not particularly exciting. Would hold him up and he collapsed onto the table. I dried him out in the sun, so he can literally do that, but his legs became crooked after that, so that's literal as well, isn't it? And he ran around with a limp. So this isn't natural, that isn't actually happening. So it is, I mean, we could say he's already said he's got legs, so that could be an example of anthropomorphism, as one of you lovely people have already suggested. So anthropomorphism being when we give body parts to something which doesn't literally have body parts. So for example, table legs. Right. Mum eventually wrapped his legs in saran wrap. So saran wrap is cling film, so that he could wallow to his heart's content. So loads and loads of personification going on. So I think so far we haven't really found any evidence for him not having an active imagination. So he then goes to talk about Lehu liked to pounce. So again, Lehu, initially I thought he was a dog when I first read this, and he might be, but he's not a real one. So in this, can you see the evidence for why he's not real and how we know he's made out of paper? So, but one time a cornered bird struck back in desperation and tore his ear. He whimpered and winced, so I think this is quite nice. So he's actually able to sort of imagine and empathise and sympathise with what those feelings might be, and understand what needs to happen for that situation to be made better. So as I held him and Mum patched his ear together with tape, he avoided birds after that. So what in there tells you that he is not a real animal? It's quite subtle what's in there, which tells you. Yeah, patch his ear up with tape. Yeah, so if it was a real animal, we wouldn't be doing that, would we? We would probably be I hope we'd be taking them to the vets. So yeah. And what the nice thing about this is that it's not obvious that to the reader when we read it, it does seem like that this is an actual pet because this one's actually got a name. So he's taking that even further. It's almost like an imaginary friend, isn't it? Yeah. So, and then one day I saw a TV documentary about sharks and asked Mum for one of my own. So I think this might potentially be evidence against, potentially, I think it's tenuous. So evidence against him having an active imagination. So he's seeing an animal and thinking, oh right, I want one of those now, rather than thinking independently. Then I asked Mum to make me this. So make me, I don't know, an octopus. So he's using the stimulus in his environment to influence his ideas because he can't quite make his own, maybe potentially, but I think it is tenuous. That could potentially be our against. Right, she made the shark, but he flapped about on the table unhappily. So again, we've got loads more personification. Filled the sink with water and put him in. He swam around happily. Got some repetition of around there. However, after a while, he became soggy and translucent and slowly sank to the bottom. So we've got some sibilance going on. And he's also sort of able to understand, I think, sort of in his head, initially you think, oh, well, it's a shark. So, and I know it belongs in this environment, but because it's not literally a shark and it's made out of paper, it becomes soggy very quickly. So things have to be improvised. So that's why she makes him one out of tin foil. So things are adapted in order for those animals to be in the environment that they should naturally be from what he has experienced via documentaries or just life generally. So I'm going to leave it there in terms of finding and highlighting information which suggests that he's got an imaginative, an active imagination, because so far there's absolutely loads for agree, isn't there? So I don't think we need to go any further in pulling things apart, because I want to go through a model answer with you. So let's just quickly find evidence then. So let's choose a different highlighter colour. So we're now looking for evidence that he is spellbound by his mother's creations. So here we go. So let's perhaps look at the second part then. So I filled the sink with water and put him in. He swam round and around happily. However, after a while he became soggy and translucent and slowly sank to the bottom, the folds coming undone. I reached in to rescue him, and all I ended up with was with a wet piece of paper. So I think with this, there seems to be a tone of loss, a tone of unhappiness. So I think we could say that this is evidence for him sort of having this love for his animals that his mum's creating. Leo put his front paws together at the edge of the sink and rested his head on them. Ears drooping, he made a low growl in his throat that made him feel guilty. So it's almost like he's getting let's go for paws together on the edge of the sink. So it's almost like he's having Lehu grieve for the loss of this shark. I mean, it's a piece of paper, isn't it? So it was never alive in the first place, but to the narrator it was. So he's sort of manifesting his own ideas of sort of loss and grief that he thinks is appropriate to losing this friend that his mum has created, by having Lehu grieve in a physical way. So I think that's a really nice one there. And then Mum made me a new shark this time out. And then he lived happily in a large gulf next to the bowl to watch the shark chasing the goldfish. Now, the shark isn't actually chasing the goldfish, is it? I mean, we can assume that these are probably real goldfish if he's in a large goldfish bowl. Perhaps they're not. We don't really know for sure, do we? Because we were sort of initially tricked with Lehu being an actual pet. So the idea that he's just sat watching the shark floating about, I think, is so sweet, and also in a way a little bit sad, that, you know, that's the best thing that he can possibly do. So I think it's really sweet, personally. So I don't really think there's any evidence against him not being spellbound by these creations, and the focus throughout doesn't really waver. So we could talk about the focus is continually on these animals and their actions, and the only sort of wavering that we have is here, where he's watching a documentary about sharks, but then he goes on to ask his mum to make a shark. So I think that's rather interesting. I don't really think there's any evidence against it. So let's flick back. So we've talked about our impressions of the narrator a little bit, and we've been talking about how the writer is effective as I've been debating why I think I agree or I disagree. So what's quite nice is, if you are not sure, you can take highlighters into the exam. I recommend that you do. Personally, I'm in visual, so I'm quite biased to a highlighter, and I love my stationery. But I do recommend it just because personally I think it's easier than underlining with a black pen, because you're only allowed, is it only black now, or can you use blue? I don't know, but you will get black text, and it's quite difficult to just find underlinings of black. So I think having it jump out at you like that is nicer, personally. And I think with your question 4, if you're not sure whether I agree or disagree, or you might want to make a debate and not just go for the easy option, the more perhaps straightforward option of agreeing. Take in, I'd say maybe 4 different coloured highlighters if you can get a pack of 4, which are usually orange, green, yellow and pink, something like that. And colour code, so an agree for the first section. So with this one, I did yellow for agreeing with an active imagination and orange for not agreeing with it. And then you can visually see the list that you were making. And then the narrator being spellbound by the mother's actions. I've only used blue as an agree because I couldn't really find anything for disagree. So quite nice visual way to create lists and without you having to take the time to draw a table and a column and put all the evidence into the right areas. So a nice easy fix really for that. So I do recommend that. Right, so let's have a crack at doing some modelling then. So this is more like the sort of text you will be given, just because it's a short story and it will usually be something that none of you have ever come across. If you have come across it, you're very lucky, but it's not set up for you to know what it is. Right, so I'm initially going to start off with, because I've decided I'm going to strongly agree with this one, because I think we didn't really find that much evidence for disagree. I think we found one which I thought was a bit tedious and was, perhaps taking the analysis a bit too far. So I'm going to say I strongly agree, and then I'm going to use the vocabulary from the question. The narrator has an active imagination. As he is able to personify, so personification, same thing, the origami, can't spell origami today, there we go, origami creations. So I've got my language device in there which I can use. Right, so I'm going to give an example then. So I've made my point, I've said that I strongly agree, now I'm going to go on to my evidence. So I'm sort of considering my impressions of the narrator here with that point that I've made. So the water buffalo jumped into a dish. I love the idea of him having a water buffalo. I think it's not an obvious animal to have, is it? Right, so as this, I'm going to put this in inverted commas, just because it's not actually a water buffalo, is it? I mean, it's in the shape of a water buffalo, but it's not actually. Is constructed out of paper. He is unable to carry out such activities. So that's my basic low-level analysis. I'm not going to get many marks with that just by itself. So I need to take it a little bit further. So this is my sort of analysis point. This is my evaluation. So the narrator therefore detaches himself from the animal as if he is not the one controlling its actions. The persistent use of personification, because there is loads and loads throughout this. I think if you were given this in the exam to talk about for your question 4, I don't think there was a way that you cannot talk about personification for this because it is so integral. So the persistent use of personification creates the impression that the child has a sense of joy. So now I'm really showing what my impressions are with the animals. Right, so let's have a think about this. So the narrator therefore detaches himself from the animal as if he's not controlling its actions. The persistent use of personification creates the impressions that the child creates the impression that the child has a sense of joy with the animals. Now I've started to evaluate, but I haven't taken it very far. So let's go for the use. By using detachment, double T, isn't it? The writer shows how integral these animals are to the narrator and how important they are, I suppose, to his imaginative development and his social and emotional interactive skills. Let's have a look at what's sending. Yeah, I will make it bigger. It is only black, thank you. Yeah, so if it is only black, then yeah, I would definitely recommend taking in highlighters because it's just easier to pick out, I think. Right. So yeah, the problem with the shared text editor is when you're writing at a normal size, it does tend to swallow it up a little bit. So that's our first paragraph then. Second, so the narrator also uses the metaphorical hyperbole magnified to the size of coffee cups, which I really love. I think that's really effective. Right, coffee cups to describe the eyes of, now let me make sure I spell this right, Leu. Here the writer clearly demonstrates the intelligence and imagination of the narrator, who is able to convey imagery to the reader as well as making accurate comparisons to well-known objects. Right, the narrator also uses the metaphorical hyperbole, need my comma there, magnified to the size of small coffee cups to describe the eyes of Leu. Here the writer clearly demonstrates the intelligence and imagination of the narrator, who is able to convey imagery to the reader as well as making accurate comparisons to well-known objects. So the reader is, not the reader, the author, because we've already said writer, the author is therefore effective in creating a sense of magnitude and importance of these animals to the child. So just taking that a bit further. Right, so that's both looking at the child has an active imagination. Let's move on then to the second one, so that he's spellbound. So the narrator appears to be spellbound. So again, I'm using vocabulary from the question, by his mother's creations as his focus. So now I'm looking at a structural device throughout. The text is almost solely fixed on the origami animals, and then I'm going to give them a quotation. So the animals got into trouble. Nice little straightforward one there. And I'm going to put another one in as well, just to show that it's the focus that's right at the start, and then I'm going to choose one at the end as well. So Mom made a shark for me. By not diverging away from the topic of interest, what is his name? The author's name is Leu. So Leu is able to show the narrator's unwavering dedication to the animals which he seems to be unable to remove his stream of consciousness from. Right, so that's my first one for the narrator being spellbound. Then I'm going to do another one. So this spellbound nature is further demonstrated as the narrator appears to show compassion and care towards the items. So notice that I'm calling them items rather than animals, because that is literally what they are, that are unable to feel. So he whimpered and winced as I held him. This personification, so I'm going back to personification here, but it's just because there was so much. Personification effectively demonstrates the love that a child, it's a specific one, that the child has for his toys, as well as the knowledge that things must be looked after in order to continue play. He also demonstrates, let's get rid of demonstrates, he also, I don't want to use demonstrates or shows, he also implies that his social, and so I've already talked about this, so his, let's go emotional development is advanced, and that he is able to feel sympathy for those who aren't even able to feel pain. So that is my what a good one looks like for you. Right, so we're getting to question time. So if you've got any questions, anything that you want clearing up, please throw them at me now. I'm just going to go through a couple of extra things for you as well. So appropriate sentence starters, so these are just some things to get you going. So I strongly agree, somewhat agree, I agree with, or vice versa for disagree. This is shown by evidence for this. I believe that this demonstrates, this could be interpreted as, I think that this effectively, alternatively, however, on the other hand, this could indicate that. So just some ways for you to debate there. So we've talked about some of the frequently asked questions. So question is a 20 marker. You should be spending about 25 minutes on this question. In terms of planning, I think what you should be doing is using those highlighters and reading the question carefully and then reading the extract, so you are actively reading so you don't waste any time. Which bullet point is the most important to talk about? You need to talk about all of them because it's almost a point evidence analysis bullet point system for this one. You do have to talk about all of these bullet points. They are all equally important. You should be writing at least 4 paragraphs, and you should be choosing the quotations that you can speak the most about. So some of these are the same for questions 2 and 3. So do pick short quotations, consider the context, consider why devices are effective, consider why the writer has chosen to do them. Or do things, choose relevant quotations that you can say a lot about, link pieces of evidence together to support your point. You are allowed to write in first person for this if you want to. So I would say I strongly agree. I also think that is fine. Be clear as to whether you're agreeing or disagreeing. So I would start off with I agree, I disagree. So the examiner knows exactly what you're going for. Debate your opinions, weigh up your argument. If you're going to say I slightly agree or I somewhat agree, because that's suggesting that there's sort of a little niggle, which means that there's something which is stopping you from saying I strongly agree. Use the vocab in the question. Don't paraphrase quotations. Don't speak about the first bullet point and not related to the second bullet point. You need to be thinking about all of those things in every paragraph that you do. Talk about any other structural features when you don't know what to say. So with that, if there's structural features and you think, I struggle with my question 3, just talk about language devices. You can talk about tone maybe. Don't disagree just because you think you're going to get more marks for it, because you won't. Don't place yourself in the text. So this is what some students do is you actually sort of place yourself in the scene and you talk about how you feel whilst watching it. That's slightly different, so don't be careful with doing that, so don't do that. And talk about whether or not you liked or enjoyed the text. Your opinion on whether you enjoyed it doesn't matter, because you're not reviewing the text, you're just saying whether you agree or disagree with what somebody has said, and effectively their review. So read the question before you start reading. Use highlighters. I know I've been bagging you across the head with those, but highlighters, underlining keywords is really helpful. Keep in mind the questions you are going to cover when you are reading. Keep your eye on the clock, so once you've got to your 25 minutes up, move on to your question 5, because your question 5 is worth half of that exam. Get your question 5 done. If you've got time at the end to come back to it, if you think there's more that you could say. But equally, if you've got time at the end and think I can't write as well as everything that I've already written, it's not going to be of the same standard, don't write about anything else. If you think you've already done a good job just because you've got extra time, don't necessarily feel that you've got to spend that time writing on a question that you think you've already done pretty well, just in case your quality drops. So in terms of revision, I would say make sure you are happy with all the terminology for questions 2 and 3, because that's what you will be using and applying. There's other stuff you can talk about as well. So for example, yesterday I said that epiphany had came up, which is something that we haven't talked about for question 2 and 3. I would say practice identifying those features. There are loads of Quizlets that people have made for just matching examples and definitions up with the terminology, so that might be a good place to look for you in terms of revision if you haven't made something like that. And use past papers and sample questions to practice. So for this one, I just type in AQA GCSE English Language Paper 1, and it will take you to the page where there are past papers that you can download. There's mark schemes there as well. Sample questions, so Save My Exams is a really good site to go to. I think that is a subscription that you have to pay for, but I think you might get something free to start off with. You might get a sample, I'm not quite sure, but that's a good place to go look. GCSE Bite Size with the BBC, also a good place to look. Right, let's have a look at what you've fired at me. Oh, Leo means tiger in Chinese. Oh, that's so interesting, I didn't know that. Yeah. At the end of the extract, there is an epiphany realisation of the history behind his mother. What do you mean by that? I'm not quite sure what you mean. What is the history that he's talking about at the end? Don't know. Right. Oh, so is that right at the end? If you've gone to have a look at the rest of it? Because we're not told that in what we've got. Right. Any questions then? So, how do you know that the evidence that you've shown can get to achieve the maximum points? Right. So, I would choose evidence that you think is strong and you can write about. So if there's maybe more than one feature in it, or you can talk about a feature and use maybe 2 pieces of evidence, I think that's the best way to do it. There aren't, again, with your evidence, there isn't sort of a hierarchy of the pieces of evidence that you pick out. It's more what you do with them. So I would just say pick out the stuff that you can write a lot about, and that is the best way you will get marks. The more you can say, the better. Yeah, we are doing question 5 next week. So we are doing, where's my plan gone? Can't find my plan, that's not helpful. So on Tuesday we are doing plot and characterisation. And here it is, plot and characterisation, question 5. So that's more to do with the narrative writing. We are doing setting structure and point of view on Thursday, and we are doing theme and language techniques on Friday. So I think my plan was to Thursday mainly look at descriptive writing for setting structure and point of view, and theme and language techniques and motifs as well. I was going to mainly look at narrative writing for that one as well. Also in terms of videos, so next week what I'm going to put out is how to use dialogue in paper 1 question 5. So a lot of your teachers have probably told you don't use dialogue, and if you do, only use a small amount of it, but there are a few tricky rules for using dialogue, so I'm going to go through that. I'm also going to go through how to plan effectively, because you do need to plan for your question 5. And I haven't decided what my 3rd video is going to be yet. But if anybody has got any ideas and sort of anything specific that they would like to see for the question 5, now's your time to shout at me so I can sort that out for you. Right. I don't think I've missed anything. I don't think we've had many questions today.
No, there haven't been many, and I think you've just caught up with them as we've gone along. Just the last couple of minutes, if you guys have any questions, pop them in the chat. I'll just say as well, I did mention this for anyone who was in chemistry this morning, but as we've got a few questions through about other types of resources and tutoring that my tutor has, just a reminder, you can find these really handy short topic videos from all our tutors on YouTube. We also have written answers on our site, and if you were looking for one-to-one support, we have sort of one-to-one tutoring as well that you could use on top of these sessions if you just wanted some more personalised learning. And as I mentioned this morning, you can just find that on our website, and that's from sort of £20 an hour, but I think that would presumably be something you guys would discuss with your parents. But yeah, the topic videos on YouTube should be really handy as an extra revision resource on top of these tutorials. Let's have a look. Would RE possibly get added to my tutor? So we don't have any plans for adding other sort of humanity-based subjects in the near future, potentially in the long term, but I wouldn't expect it to be there anytime soon. We're sort of sticking to the core subjects at the moment. And Vicki, just one last question. How many pages need to be for question 4? I assume that means how much to write.
Yes, so I've sort of done a little bit of research on this and what sort of various teachers say, because you will find that I say things that are slightly different to what your teachers might have said, because it's just sort of the style of teaching and how your schools or departments or whatever, or perhaps individual teachers like to approach questions, what they're comfortable with teaching you guys. So I found sort of anywhere between 2 to 3 sides of A4, and obviously that depends on how big your handwriting is. So for me, my handwriting is really, really big. So yeah, I'd probably end up writing 2.5 sides. I'd aim for a minimum of 4 paragraphs for this, but I think you could definitely write about more, and I would encourage that you write about more, because 4 paragraphs in 25 minutes isn't as difficult as it sounds. I imagine there will be a lot of you guys who have more time to write more than that. So definitely don't feel that, oh, I've written my 4 paragraphs, that's it now. 4 paragraphs is good, but the more you can write, the better, I think. But again, don't ramble on to the point where things start to become a bit incoherent and your quality drops a little bit, because that will affect on your marks. So quality rather than quantity, I would say with that.
Brilliant, thanks Vicki. And someone's just put in a really lovely piece of feedback for you,
Thank you.
saying that each lesson is like a chapter in a new book, learning something new. So thank you very much for that feedback. There's been lots of great feedback today.
I'm going to have to go and have a cry at that. Sweet, thank you.
Yeah, that's really lovely. We always welcome feedback. So thanks so much, guys, for today. And it's great to hear you're finding these lessons really useful and fun. So that's fantastic. Thanks, Vicki, very much for today's session. And we'll hopefully see all you guys next week for question 5. So have a lovely weekend, everyone. Bye.
Bye.